Hello, friends, and welcome back to Spiritual Crypto. It's been a while. I'm happy to say that I don't feel like it's difficult to do this. Like I've complained about probably way too many times in the past in these recordings. I think the sankara that made it difficult to speak is totally clearing out. At least the part of it that made it feel laborious. That's not quite right. Like I don't feel the same block to trying to speak that I was feeling in the past, this like huge weight blocking it. I do still feel like translating stuff into language is really fucking annoying. And I'm angry about language and its limitations and how it also has too much masculine energy and whatever in an unhealthy way. But unless I get really good at music, or hopefully film can do this to some degree too, because film can be like sight and sound without using language, which is really cool. And I think can get us more into the feminine within the current limitations of technology. Until I'm in that space more, I have to use words to communicate ideas. So it goes. Especially if it's supposed to be like precise or something. If it's poetry or something, I can be less precise, which is cool, but that's not what this is supposed to be. This isn't a poetry podcast. So I wanted to continue speaking about my experiences of Vipassana courses, in part because it's been a really long time for one, but also because I'm about to head to what's technically my 20th Vipassana course in 2 days. I leave in 2 days to do another 10-day Vipassana course. And yeah, so I wanted to share more and start where I left off, which was sharing about my 8th Vipassana course. So I'll do that now. And again, the purpose of this is just to I've never seen anything on the internet. I've never been able to find anything online that involves somebody who'd done a number of Vipassana courses, like detailing their experience at each course. And for whatever it's worth, I know that I'd be really interested in this now for sure. Like I'm always interested in other people's experiences at the courses. But especially when I was first introduced to Vipassana, I would have been fascinated to be able to listen to somebody who'd done a number of courses talk about their experience. So that's why this exists. So on to my 8th course. So the 8th course that I did was a course that I served. And it was in July of 2018. So I was 34 at that time. And I was serving at the center, which is in like the Joshua Tree area in the desert in Southern California. 29 Palms is the town. So at that time, I was just coming out of feeling like I could leave my parents' house, where I'd had, as you may recall from earlier podcasts, I had been forced to go back to my parents' house in like a tiny town in Ohio. When I was 33, because I was so broke that I was like stealing food from grocery stores. I had no other option, and I didn't have a good relationship with them. And my now deceased father, as you may have heard me talk about in an earlier podcast as well, was a narcissist, and I was the scapegoat kid in the family, and I didn't understand any of this. And it's how it was actually like a textbook case until I was like in my late 20s through therapy. So we didn't have a good relationship, and there was a lot of different types of neglect and abuse and stuff going on. But to their credit, at least, when I just showed up on their door, age 33, like so broke I couldn't buy food in late 2017, they didn't turn me away. They let me stay there. They didn't make me pay them rent or something like that. And they even covered food. They even paid for food for like groceries and stuff while I was there. My brother, who was 30, I guess, at the time, was also there. I guess that's something of like the millennial Gen Z plight and like the way the progression of late stage capitalism dying is going, though. I mean, it's not so unusual anymore for somebody that old to have to go back to their parents' house. And I'm super lucky that like my parents had a house and they owned the house, and there's somewhere to go. So I wasn't like on the streets. So that had happened, as I talked about before, in late 2017. And then the cryptocurrency boom was happening, and Seeds cryptocurrency was introduced in October of 2017. So coming into 2018, as I mentioned in the last podcast where I talked about Vipassana courses, I'd done one course in earlier 2018. I'd done a couple courses while I was at my parents'. I would just like cobble together enough money to hop on a plane because there isn't a center. close to where my parents live. There is one that's like, I think in Ann Arbor, Michigan area. I don't think there's one in Ohio, to my knowledge. And yeah, so I would get together enough money and hop on a plane and go. And speaking of that, um, nah, man, I guess I already talked about this in the succession. I was going to say there was that story. Yes, you get, sorry. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself too much, but there was that story about like $50 coming through so that I was able to actually pay for my carry-on bag and actually attend the course. And it was like this miracle because I didn't even have $50, but a refund had just come through and hit my card apparently. And so it definitely felt like it was the universe helping me so that I could go do Vipassana. But by the time we're coming into like the middle of 2018, I remember there were 2 weddings that I went to, and it was kind of whatever, mildly interesting because one was like one of my best high school friends, and the other was one of my best college friends, and I was like a bridesmaid in her wedding. And they got married a week apart, and we were 34 years old, and I just felt like that was like unusual, sort of, or whatever. So the my friend's wedding, my friend from home got married like in our area at home where she still lives. And I went to that wedding. And then the next week was my friend from college's wedding in the Detroit area. So I just used that as a springboard. Like it was just time to go. I was okay enough. I'd set like some more ambitious financial goal. Sorry, my dog is scratching the chair because he's trying to dig a hole like it's the forest. You quit doing that. You don't need to do forest. You don't need to do that anymore. Just lay there. It's okay. You don't need to dig a hole. Okay. So I remember I like wrote in a journal or something like I have $30,000 and like blah blah blah, like these various financial goals that were supposed to be like metrics to tell me that I was ready to leave my parents' house. I didn't have anything close. I don't think I even had any savings at all, but could just feel that it was time. So I just made arrangements to go, and some friends were living in LA and they said that I could come stay with them while I was looking for a place. So I used my friend in Detroit's wedding as like the springboard or something. I just made plans to go to her wedding, take care of that, and then like move to LA right after. So once I was out in LA, so this is like late June, I was broke and my credit score was shit, which is like credit scores are total bullshit anyway. And like I have so many thoughts about how they're so terrible. They're really messed up. And another mission, a part of Seed's mission, is like helping people out regardless of their stupid credit scores. But mine was terrible. It was low just because it was maxed out. I'd always made payments on time, like at least minimum payments, but it was maxed out. So that's like what landlords look at, which is also stupid. But so I'm there and it's like, it's going to take some looking and some figuring to be able to find a place I can actually afford that will accept me in terms of a place to rent in LA. So while I'm there and staying at the friend's house, I didn't want to like overstay my welcome. And they weren't, they were like, they're no longer friends. They weren't, after I went no contact with my family, which was later that year, I guess, officially. They unfortunately, like they invited me to Thanksgiving and then like forgot that they invited me or something. So it's just like, that's not how an actual friend is. They don't forget that they invited you to Thanksgiving. So I'm just sharing that to illustrate that it wasn't a situation where I was like really supported and could trust that I had time and space and support to look for a place. I felt like I really needed to find somewhere quickly and like get out of their hair and whatever. So I considered that I could actually serve another Vipassana course. And when you do that, you can stay there and they feed you and you have a place where you're housed and whatever. So in that July of 2018, not too long after I landed in LA, I volunteered to serve at a course in Joshua Tree in the desert. So I went out there. I remember the ride was super fun. There was this dude, Aaron. It was his first course, who was nice enough to offer a ride. I think he was living in Santa Monica, and I like got an Uber to there from Playa del Rey where I was staying. And he was like a former bodybuilder. And it was like, I don't want to put too much emphasis on how people look or I might be revealing Sankara and myself in saying this or whatever, but he was like a quote unquote hot person. And there aren't a ton of hot male people at Vipassana courses, typically in my experience, in a conventional sense. And this dude was like real big, former bodybuilder, just like a hot person. And we shared the car with another guy who was getting a ride who was like a recent PhD grad from Berkeley, whose name is escaping me. I think it was something like Manish, maybe. And he was great too. He was from India originally, and he was like trying to figure out like where he was going to work for visa stuff. And that was more evidence of how stupid everything is. Like the fact that somebody like that was going to have trouble staying in this stupid country anyway, um, was another thing. But anyway, so we take this like 3-hour trip from Santa Monica out to Joshua Tree. And it started raining at the end of the drive. And it was just so fun. Like something about it was so fun. This guy was like way too hot for me, in my opinion, as somebody who's still constrained by looks, I guess, or something. And also he was younger. I don't know. Like, I don't know, not like a ton, not way younger, but somewhat younger. I was 34 at the time. And but it was just it's this is weird. I don't know how to describe this exactly. It's like I when I meet somebody, a male person who's like really like earthy or sensual or something, or like really sort of like in their bodies, I tend to be able to connect with them easily. Like I've had like 4 boyfriends really, and like 75% of them were like that. So it's like, which isn't to say that they can't also be intellectual or whatever, but there's something about that quality that I seem to be able to connect with, um, for some reason. And this guy, Aaron, had that. And so that was fun. And then the other guy was really fun too. And it was like, yeah. And I think it was going to be Aaron's birthday at the course or something. And Manish was 28, if that was his name. I'm so sorry that I don't remember with certainty what his name was. And it was like, oh, like I went to my first course over my birthday and I turned 29 while I was there. Like I started when I was 28, whatever. But it was just really fun. And like a lot of times those rides are really fun. I enjoy getting to do that and getting to know other meditators. And it's just fun. So we get there and then I'm going to serve, right? And I had never served in the kitchen before. And so I got the job of like dishwasher. We got there kind of late. We got there later than they prefer for servers to get there. But I felt that I didn't have a choice because I was getting a ride, with a meditator. And yeah, the kitchen ran really well. There was this guy, Pierre, this French guy who is a chef who he lived at the time, at least in Long Beach, and he ran the kitchen beautifully. And I found since that if there's a good kitchen manager, that makes all the difference in terms of whether there's a lot of harmony in your experience as a server in the kitchen. If you're a manager, like I had been previously, you're sort of more siloed. You're talking more with the assistant teacher, and it's a different experience. And I was able to get up for the 4:30 sit every day. So like they wanted one server in there for the first hour just to be aware of what's going on, so you could let a teacher know if something was up, because the teachers aren't in there at that time and neither are the managers. Excuse me. So I was just down to like get up and do that every day in addition to serving. And I figured out that I could actually sit and meditate for I think 7 hours a day while serving, which was pretty, that's pretty close to, if you're doing all the meditation in a course, it's like 10 hours a day. Please don't let that freak you out if you've never gone before, because there are breaks and they're not looking over your shoulder all the time or anything like that. But yeah, so it was like, cool, I can actually really get through some stuff while also serving. And the other thing that's beautiful about serving, especially like if you're in the kitchen environment, because you're like working with a larger team, is that it's like, and they tell you this, it's like this opportunity to start practicing like living with Vipassana and living with the practice in an environment that's closer to being out in the world, where you have to actually do other stuff besides only sitting and meditating as you do when you're sitting a course. So yeah, that was great. And like I washed dishes with Pierre. He had a son that was like a little older than I was. So, he was in his 60s or something at the time. And he was just cool and like easy to work with and great. And he'd already sat a 30-day. So he was more developed, and it was cool to see. I've run into this a couple other times, or at least one other time I'm thinking of. When you run into some of those people who are more developed like that, this isn't always true of teachers, though I found in my experience. It's just like they're such a pleasure to be around. They've just cleared out enough stuff that they're just a delight. and they're so easy to be around, and they just make everything better, and they can work forever. Um, I guess I'll talk a little bit more about this, but another guy who was like this that I served with, Steve, in the Washington State at the Washington State Center, he like made banana bread for everybody one day just because the bananas were going bad. He just had all this energy to do all this stuff, and he did like um I want to say triathlons. I'm not sure, but some sort of like long distance endurance sport, and he had 5 kids, and it's just like once you get to that level, you're just able to do so much stuff, and you do it without sankara. So it's not you're not torturing your stuff or torturing yourself or forcing yourself or making people around you miserable as you're doing it. It's this sort of beautiful thing, and it really kind of more than anything else, when you actually get to be around that, you get to see what the true effects of Vipassana can be, which is it's beautiful. So Pierre was like that too, to a great extent. And I was super anxious about like working with everybody because I knew I was going to have the same sankara coming up about other people's stuff that I had when I served before, which was also why it was good for me to do. And in this case, it was narcissism in one of the teachers. So I volunteered to take the teachers their dinner every night. Like people from the kitchen would prepare and like arrange so it looked nice and whatever the meals for the teachers, and then take them up to the teachers' quarters where they could eat them privately. And I volunteered to do that. And I did it with like a really sort of a pure heart. I just wanted to serve in this way. And was then told that like I wasn't bringing up, I was told about how much to bring and told that the ATs, the assistant teachers, normally don't eat very much. So I listened to that. Somebody in a long-term server in the kitchen told me that. But then one of the teachers, the female teacher, had a sankara about food, as it turned out. And it was just interesting to see how she spread misery around her. That's what all of us do when we have sankara, because she hadn't cleared this out. But there was also narcissism there. And it was just interesting to see, and interesting to see how that interacted with my own remaining sankara around narcissists, because of my experience with my dad and whatever other past life experiences I've had, and how I still would connect with narcissists and then like try to point out what was going on or like deal with it, and then how they like come at you if you do that. So this teacher, Suleika is her name. Yeah, she just had this food thing, and so she did some sort of manipulative things, unfortunately, in terms of trying to get me to do things in a different way. She wasn't upfront about it. She didn't just speak with me directly until I sort of insisted on it. She was trying to like tell the other long-term server what to do, and have that person communicate it to me. But it was narcissism at the end of the day, and I saw it, and I saw the way that she acted like she wasn't able to acknowledge her own sankara about food, and she felt like the food there was too heavy, and she was just resisting whatever was there, instead of the idea is that you're in renunciation. Like one of the big benefits of being at a course is that you're getting what's called the renunciation parami. I can't remember the Pali word for it, but there are 10 paramis, and you're accumulating them, they say, over many lives. Like, I think I struggled to describe this in an earlier podcast. Like there are clay pots for each parami, and as you're accumulating them, it's like drops in the pot until the pot is full. And they say like at a certain point when you have enough paramis, you'll just like find Vipassana, and you'll just want to start doing it because you've developed enough to do that. And the paramis are things like renunciation and metta, loving kindness, and adittan, strong determination, things like that. So the renunciation parami, they say, is one of the hardest to get, especially in the modern world, because it's about relying on the charity of others, renouncing just like, I don't know, getting things yourself. So when you're at the courses, you're receiving everything you have there, you're receiving because of the charity of others, because somebody else before you chose to give that to the center so that other meditators could benefit, which is such a beautiful thing. And you're receiving that parami, you're receiving that renunciation parami because you're accepting that. And so it was like this teacher didn't understand that fully, because she wasn't just accepting what was offered. She was like, had Sankara about it. So yeah, I was struggling with that. And then she had some misogyny in her too. And like at one of the meetings that the servers had with the assistant teachers, I asked why there. So this was a Farsi course. It was taught in Farsi and English. And I asked why in the translations of the various translations that I'd heard at various courses that the translators were almost all male. And I asked why at all, but at that time, I think all but one teacher I had ever been around at a course, the male teachers always spoke, with that one exception. There was one female teacher I had seen speak. And this teacher, Suleika, just like brushed it off and laughed this awkward laugh and tried to talk about how, like, well, we don't see Goenka's wife speaking because she didn't speak English, which I knew, but that wasn't what I was asking. So it was just narcissism and internalized misogyny, the two biggest sankara that I still had myself. And it's just so interesting how that works. And Roy, the male teacher who is Suleika's husband, mentioned this at one point, which I appreciated. Like, he said, as I recall, something about how like teachers sometimes after they've talked to a student, they'll need to go and, sit and meditate for 15 minutes themselves because the sankara connect with each other. Like, you'll law of attraction in the sankara of somebody else. And it's almost like it's the same sankara. So if you're like me and you grew up around a narcissist who was like your parent who was abusive to you or whatever, until you've healed that, until you've released that sankara, like me, you're going to continue running into narcissists. And so I attracted it. And then Suleika had whatever sankara she had about narcissism and internalized misogyny. So, and then the other big one for me is misogyny being every fucking place. And this word, that I invented, misofem, to describe denigration of feminine energy, is also everywhere. And that's another reason I found the Vipassana courses to be sacred. Because Goenka, at least at the time of the recordings that you see in the 10 days, I couldn't detect any misogyny or misofem. And therefore that showed up in what he created. And I think I've said this in earlier podcasts. So it's like this sort of beautiful balance of healthy masculine and healthy feminine energy, like I've never seen in any other man-made thing on earth so far in like recorded history and in my life as Rachel. I think I remember it from more distant past lives, like in Atlantis and stuff. Excuse me. And I know I'm so deeply grieving that. And like, I think most people aren't even aware of that yet. So it feels lonely because I feel like I don't know a lot of other people who are necessarily aware of that. And certainly I don't know them in like my regular life. So I can like talk to people who understand or whatever. Yeah. So it was just interesting to see, of course, I aligned with that in an authority figure at a Vipassana course in this teacher. And I think I kind of challenged them because I just asked questions and the other servers thanked me at different points for speaking up, which was really appreciated. But Suleika just unfortunately was in this position of authority and wasn't able to acknowledge her sankara, let alone to engage with me as a student because of it. And so that was my first sort of taste of something I'll share more about later. And that, sankaras and assistant teachers can show up, and sankara always make people around miserable unless they're if I'd been doing Vipassana properly myself, I wouldn't have been affected by this, but I wasn't yet. And I hadn't released those sankara yet. So it was interesting to see that. So yeah, it was just that experience serving and being in the desert, and it was super hot. It was July in the desert and I didn't really mind, which was an effect of the Vipassana too. And yeah, it was really helping me start learning how to actually be around other people and work with other people and just sit with the sankara I still had about being an empath and feeling like I could feel so much of their stuff and had so much awareness about their stuff, but had no equanimity about their stuff. And so I would get angry that I felt so tired because I was taking on somebody else's stuff that they weren't even necessarily aware of, let alone they certainly weren't asking me to take it on. It was just something I was constantly doing. So I was starting to work with that sankara more directly through that service, and it helped. So after that, I immediately wanted to serve another course. And I mean, when you're serving, for 10 days. So it's like sometimes you'll get a half day off, or if there are more servers, even a day off. And as the course progresses and people are meditating more, it becomes a much, much easier job. Which is another interesting thing because it shows you how it's the sankhara in yourself and around you that make you tired. So yeah, I mean, it can feel fairly effortless to serve 10 days in a row, but it's still a week and a half straight work, right? But I just chose to do another course like right away. So I saw that there was a need for servers at a course in Washington State in the northwestern part of the US. So this is now my ninth course. So I guess this would have been late July. I think it started in late July of 2018 and ended in August, if I remember correctly. So I went up to that center. I'd sat at that center before, as maybe you recall, like my third course. And this one was a Thai course. And when I was doing this, I wasn't doing it for purely, like philanthropic reasons because I felt so much gratitude through Vipassana. I was also doing it because I still didn't have a place to live. And I remember when I went up there, I had enough money somehow to scrape together to get an Airbnb, but I couldn't afford Ubers, or I didn't have a lot of money for food. And I happened to have a friend then who was living in Portland who drove me around some and took me to the grocery store and stuff and bought me dinner once. And so that was helpful, but it's just crazy. I remember how hot that Airbnb was, and it was really small. And I'm just thinking back about it. I'm recording this in 2022. This was just over 4 years ago. And it's like a completely different world. I mean, not obviously just for me. It's just so much is changing with ascension energies, I think, and the rise of the feminine on earth and everything we're going through. And COVID was a part of that. It seems kind of crazy that was 4 years ago, because more has changed, I think, in this 4 years than in any period before, in my lifetime at least. And I think arguably in the last 100 years, maybe. I mean, we're really undergoing some crazy changes, barring a world war, knock wood, which I don't think we're going to have to deal with this time. It seems like the energies have shifted enough that we missed another world war, thank God. Yeah, so I'm going up there to serve, and I get a ride to the center, and I'm just thinking, how boring is it that I'm describing this minutia, and how serving also keeps you more in your, if I'd just been sitting these courses, I probably would have some more profound progress to share that was maybe more interesting. But serving is important too, and it just helps you see more about, like I said earlier, how you actually interact with the world while in a Vipassana setting, and it kind of helps you prepare more for the real world and whatever. So I get a ride off the rideshare board, and there's a monk in the car with us. And he's a white guy, and he's talking and sharing more about how he'd actually started at this center that we're going to in Washington State. And he'd been like a manager there for a long time, and then just gradually stopped interacting with money so much, and then just decided that he wanted to be a monk. And so he wanted to be like a forest monk in Thailand, I guess. And so he ended up doing that, going there. But his family needed him back home. I think his father was terminally ill. So he'd come back to the northwest part of the States to help take care of his father. So he was going to go sit at this course. So we're riding up there, and I just remember just feeling like he wasn't that far along. And this is totally still a thing for me. And I mean, I think the reality is, I think my awareness really has developed. I think I have even then, and I mean, it's, developed further since then as I've continued to practice. I think I can really see better than knockwood about anyone I know. I don't mean that this is infallible, or that I'm 100% of the time seeing more of where somebody is than everyone around me. But largely I feel that I'm able to kind of see where they're at. But they talk about the Vipassana courses, I think I mentioned, that it's awareness and equanimity are two wings of the bird. And if they're out of whack, if you have a bunch of awareness but you don't have equanimity, the bird can't fly. It's out of balance. So even though my awareness, I think, has really been honed, my equanimity is still like nowhere near caught up to there. So that's what I really need to work on through my practice. So, like I would notice that somebody like this monk seemed like he wasn't quote unquote very far along, not as far along as I would think a monk would be. And he wasn't like that old. I mean, he probably wasn't even like 40 or something, I think. But he devoted years of his life to this practice exclusively. And so even though I had that awareness, I was like annoyed with him or just like I was like, "Meh," like I mean, I think he hadn't had a lot of people to talk to for a while either, and not female people, and, um, yeah, I was just, like, not inspired at all by what I saw in his development. So then we get to the center, and it's a Thai course, like I think I mentioned, which means, it's just like the previous course I mentioned was a Farsi course. This course was taught in Thai and English, and it also had Thai food. And that actually meant that being in the kitchen, I was in the kitchen again for this course, was a lot more intense because it just took a lot more work to prepare the Thai menu than like the typical American menu, I guess, at most courses, which is what we'd had during the Farsi course I just served. We had like a couple like Iranian Persian dishes, but it wasn't like the whole Farsi menu. Here it was like, or like a whole Persian menu, I guess. Here it was like all Thai food. And the kitchen manager was like out of control, like on a weird power trip. Um, this older Thai woman who just kind of terrorized everyone who was there. And the kitchen was really cramped and small there. And I mean, like the tub where you'd wash pots and pans wasn't at a good height. So people's even somebody like me, like I'm not that tall. I'm like 5'6.5" ish. Like it hurt my back to lean over it. So if somebody was taller than me, it probably hurt their back even more. And I'll talk more about this in later sessions because I had other interactions with this center that it showed were manifested through some of the stuff. Like um, the first thing to repair to improve at that center would be the kitchen. The center in Southern California had done this as they're expanding their center. But the center, like, there's other sankara going on there that we're getting in the way, whatever. So yeah, I was just like I said earlier with that guy Pierre that I served with before, who was the kitchen manager. He was great, and that really made for a harmonious experience overall for everybody in the kitchen. This kitchen manager, whose name I can't recall, just was making everybody miserable. and and so it was pretty miserable. And I mean that shows my own sankara. If I didn't have that sankara, I wouldn't have cared. But there was other stuff going on, like the same my sankara about being confronted with misogyny showed up again because like I mean, this monk that I mentioned, this male monk that I got the ride up with, he was sitting higher than the teachers, which was like a thing. I learned later that the teachers had to ask him if it was okay for their seats to also be high in the front of the meditation hall, which is like how they always are. And that's one thing that Goenka is really good about emphasizing is this idea of leaving ritual outside of the courses, which is a bigger deal in India than it is in like the US. But it's not a religion, man. It's not like it's just Vipassana. It's just you just do the meditation and develop through the meditation. It's not an organized religion. Like the Buddha never said that there should be Buddhism and that it's an organized religion. And Goenka does a good job of emphasizing that time and again in the discourses when he teaches. And yeah, so I was just like, so there's that. And then we also had to like feed the monk in this special way that like made for more work for the people in the kitchen. He had to be fed like separately from everybody else. And then at the end, they were talking about doing something where you like, we're going to go out and like raise the table for him or something. And it was just all ritualistic stuff that didn't have to do with Vipassana. And I also started to see, so the male teacher at this course was this guy, Stuart, who was a white guy, American guy, who'd married a Thai woman whose name I think was Christine. And I really started to see, and this was a Thai course, right? So it was it was there was a dangerous it was getting too close to being a religious thing, and there wasn't enough leadership surrounding that to prevent it from happening. So that's why also it's smart that like Goenka, even though he's been dead for almost 10 years, is still like the main teacher at these courses. It's like the physical people who are there are the assistant teachers, because things can't get too out of whack when that's the case, but they still kind of can if the people who are there aren't managing things. So, I mean, it was just this thing of seeing all this bending over backward we were supposed to do for this monk. And then I can't remember if I'd mentioned this previously, but when I sat my first Satipatthana like a year before this in 2017 in the summer, um, there were nuns there, like female ascetics were sitting the course with us. And they sat on the floor and like they didn't have fucking like elevated seats somewhere else. So I brought this up in the meetings with the teachers and I was just like, why are we catering to this monk, this male ascetic, when at previous courses I've sat, the female ascetics, were on the floor. And I didn't serve that course, so I didn't see if the women were being fed a certain way, but I remember seeing them in the hall, in the dining hall with us. Like they weren't getting like a separate fancy, like isolated meal like we were supposed to do for this male ascetic. So I brought it up and that was like there was some reaction. One of the other, like a long-term female server there told me she appreciated that I spoke up. And I remember she said, like, we don't get a lot of that here, which will come into play later as I tell you more about future Vipassana courses in interacting with that center. So there was that. And then, yeah, just like the kitchen manager was out of control, like I said. And I'd once done a separate volunteering thing with this male meditator who was like 60 years old or something. He was a generation ahead of me. He was a white guy. And he talked about one time when he was serving and there was a server who was just creating problems in the kitchen. And so they talked to the assistant teachers about it. And the assistant teachers actually had that server sit the course, which was really brilliant to help him clear out whatever Sankara was, causing that behavior. And so I just noticed how at this course, when I spoke up about it, like there was misogyny there because they weren't fucking like listening to me. Everyone, people in the kitchen were having this experience, but nobody else voiced what we all were experiencing besides me. And so it wasn't a situation where, the male teacher even told me that he thought he could see what I was talking about, but they didn't ask that kitchen manager to sit the course or something. They just let it continue like unabated. And there was like a really good, I guess, Thai cook who was there, who was a server, but she wasn't able to cook in the way that she would have. I don't know. It was just interesting to see like the different facets of Sankara and how like if a teacher doesn't do something, then it like impacts, like maybe the food would have been way better for everybody if that kitchen manager had been asked to sit the course instead. And then like the good Thai cook could have cooked freely, whatever. It's just like there's so many different ways that Sankara affect everybody else. So clearly that's again my big Sankara about like misogyny and authority figures and stuff. And to the male teacher's credit, he did engage with me and he talked more about like nuns. And I talked about the Tipitaka, which is like the text that was left after the Buddha died. And I get it. Like the Buddha apparently told Ananda, his like assistant, who was also his brother cousin, I think. They shared I think they had the same father, and then their mothers were sisters. And Ananda was like his assistant for the latter part of his life. He told Ananda that if women got Dhamma in his lifetime, if they learned how to do Vipassana, it would leave Earth, I think like 500 years sooner, something like that. And I can buy into stuff like that. Like I believe in past lives. I've remembered what I believe to be many lives in which I was male. And like with the way the world has been in the past millennia and the way the feminine and women have been subjugated, I could see that something that was made available to them could have been denigrated and therefore like snuffed out sooner. I can totally believe that idea that if it had been given to women sooner, it could have left Earth sooner. So the Buddha apparently made these like much more stringent requirements for women who wanted to learn Vipassana. And that's in the Tipitaka. It's stuff like plucking out all of your hair and shit like that. Whereas like the men can like shave their heads. But that shouldn't apply in a ritualistic way today when it's just about Vipassana and it's like a text that the Buddha didn't write. Um, yeah, so that just kind of confronted more of my big Sankara, which is how it works. You keep running into it until you heal the thing and release the Sankara, and then you're not law of attraction style continuing to bump into it at every turn. So, yeah, that was a more challenging course, and I don't know. I'm always glad I spoke up and there was some response. But then after that course, um I was in Montreal. Yeah, I guess I went to Montreal right away, which I'll talk a little bit about later, I think, because they're already getting too long. But I went and served a course in the Montreal area soon after. And yeah, I went to the trust of that center, like their board. They were going to have a meeting immediately following the conclusion of our course. And so I called in. I'd already physically left the center, but I called in to talk about like this difference in the way the male aesthetic and female aesthetics were treated. And they then had me get on a call with like the senior ATs at that center, Ben and Kathy, which I did. And I could just tell that there was just a car there. Like Kathy in particular had visible internalized misogyny, which I ran into harder later on, which again I'll talk more about. But I don't want to I don't know. I mean, this is more boring, I feel like, because I'm not telling you about like profound things that cleared for me. It's more like I was running into the Sankara, and if I were sitting these courses, I'll probably experience this, in a couple of days when I head to a course, because I haven't cleared my Sankara about misogyny and misofem, and I haven't cleared. Yeah, there's just a lot more grief and anger. More grief, I think, that's in that though at this point. I think I've cleared a lot of the anger. So when I just go sit a course, what'll happen a lot of times is that I'll have memories that are connected to that Sankara come up while I'm sitting. And maybe I'll notice that the Sankara seems to show in a specific unpleasant sensation in my body or whatever. But like the beauty of the courses when you sit them is that you're not taking in more. You're not continuing to have that negative reaction to your perception of external stimuli, which therefore, like, you're not continually reacting in a way that's harder not to do when you're serving. When you're sitting, the idea is that that's part of the reason you don't talk at the courses, because if you're talking to somebody, then you'll sit down for an hour sit or something and you'll be remembering the conversation you just had, and it's like you'll be taking in more stuff that can be food for the Sankara instead of just allowing them to release, because you're going into yourself more and you're going deeper and working with what's already there without piling on more Sankara. The idea is to reduce that as much as possible at the courses. So yeah, when you're serving, it's a different thing. And that's part of the reason, they want you to at least have sat one course before you're serving, so you have an understanding of it. Yeah, I think I'll stop there because it's already been almost 45 minutes. That's only 2 more courses. And I'm worried this was quote unquote boring. And you can totally still hear my Sankara because I'm like still kind of like righteous about running into misogyny and like kind of mad / sad about the Sankara and these teachers. But like they're not out, right? It's like they're not Buddhas yet. When you run into someone who's really developed, it right away. I mean, when they made the recording with Goenka that you see at the 10-day courses in 1991, he was 67 years old and already like, I think 35, 36 years into his practice. And he had whatever he'd done in previous lives and stuff too. So it's like you can feel more of that. And that's why I think, I mean, if you can find higher developed people and be around them and sit with them, I think it really, really strengthens your practice. But a lot of people aren't there yet. We're not done. We're still here working out our shit and whatever. So part of the sankara that I need to release is being kinder to other people about that, even when, you know, they're harming me. They can't harm me if I'm doing Vipassana properly because then I'm not reacting to anything they're putting out, no matter how negative it is, you know? So that's the big lesson there for me, I think, bringing that equanimity back up so that it's more in balance with the awareness. So yeah, I'm continuing to work on that and I think it's getting better. And I think that's part of, like I started to say at the beginning of this recording, like I don't feel the same difficulty in speaking on in trying to do a podcast like this now. And I think it's great. And I think it's because I'm releasing part of this fear of attack sankara and the sankara of like feeling so much weight when I'm feeling the sankara of other people as like an empath or whatever. So yeah, if you think of yourself as an empath, mm, Vipassana really helps. It helps more than anything else. Like I don't I see conversations or like YouTube videos or whatever about this idea of protecting your energy if you're an empath, or people talk about that on TikTok or something. Vipassana does that for you in the truest, deepest way because I mean, I'm clearly, as I've said, not there yet, but it helps you get to a place where you're unaffected by it and you just have compassion for people who may be doing something that would have previously been really harmful to you because you've released the stuff in you, the trauma in you that was interacting with that sankara in them. So yeah, man, it's um, I can't, say enough. I can't shout loudly enough that I'm totally convinced that Vipassana is the way out. It's the way to clear stuff at the deepest level and the fastest means to getting to happiness. But you're not going to do it until you're ready to do it. So it's no amount of words is going to get you there. It's going to be a matter of you'll connect with it when and if you're ready. So that's all I got to say today, I guess. So next time I'll start with my 10th course and talk about that. The 10th course was in Montreal. All right, y'all. Thank you for listening. Bye.